Welcome. How are you? We're going to be talking about rising and thriving as a woman leader in academia. And you're probably wondering, well, why are you interviewing Rajshree Agarwal? Well, we go back a long ways. We have been colleagues and friends for about 15 years. I knew Rajshree when I was at the University of Illinois. She is now the Rudolph Lamone Chair and Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship, and she's also the Director of the Snider Center for Enterprise and Markets. Woo!
You got it.
Now we've gotten that out of the way. Let's get started. We're going to ask her a few questions. I know Rajshree really well. I know what kind of questions she's going to answer because I know her. And there's a reason why I wanted her to be in this space. Because we're in a time now where for many groups, particularly your group, we are looking for answers on how we actually can rise and thrive in a structure such as this. So Rajshree, could we start by just having you share with us your background? Just start with where you were born and just bring yourself up in like 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Well, thank you, Victor. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to start when I was 12 years old. You kind of create for yourself after you look back into your life. What is your narrative? What are your defining moments? For me, I remember at age of 12, now I was born in a very wealthy, successful family, and my father was very traditional. Women in his family did not work because that would be a slap on his face and an inability for him to support the women in his life. At age 12, he additionally said to me, the right and the responsibility of finding a man for you is mine. Don't you forget that. At age 12, I was very much a daddy's girl. And my answer was, of course, just do me one favor, find me a man who is living in the same town as you, because I can't bear the thought of being in a different town than where you are. It took me a good 7 to 8 years, and that was my journey into my discovery of my own identity, that I now realize that there are two things that you cannot renege on, two choices that you make that ultimately then define the rest of your choices. The person you marry and what you choose to work on. And those are the two choices that I was not willing for my father to make for me. So it was very painful. And in retrospect, if you were to ask me to do that now, I don't know that I would have the courage or the chutzpah, as a lot of people say, to do what I did at age 21, which is leave India with 2 suitcases in my name and come for a PhD here. Because you know what? I wasn't that interested in academia. Believe it or not, I didn't think research was cut out for me. I wasn't cut out for research. Spending years getting a PhD, let alone thinking about doing that for the rest of my life, that was something that I thought was the most boring. But academia was my ticket out of India, because I was very good in my studies, and at that time at least, if I needed to come to the country, given the visa issues, I needed to be a student, and I needed to come here on an assistantship where I could support myself, because if I was walking out on my father, I was not going to take a penny of his, because that was not okay. And he didn't speak to me for 6 years. And then we reconciled afterwards. And those were very tough times. But, I became very successful as I graduated well from University of Buffalo, went to University of Central Florida as an academic in economics. And I did pretty well, and I can talk about what worked and what didn't work there. But I realized that economics was, that's when I realized that research was my passion. Teaching was always my first love. But I realized I was good at research. And the more I realized I was good at research, the more I started to love it. And the more I started to love it, the more I invested in being good at it too. And it took me up until I think 10 years ago to really claim what I think is success, being able to say at the same time, I love what I do and I'm good at it. And that, of course, takes a lot of hard work to get there. And I couldn't really say that I was happy until about 10 years ago, too, because I had to earn the ability to say that I was happy, doing what I was doing in all parts of my life.
How do you define happy?
I define happiness as not ups and downs of joy and sorrow, but a continued state of feeling like you have achieved your values.
I just want to go back to the time in which your father didn't speak to you for 6 years. How did you feel about that?
Oh, I was heartbroken. More than I was heartbroken, I felt like, to be very honest, that I was not worthy enough, because the one person in my life that I truly, truly loved rejected me, rejected my choices. In fact, when I got married to Rob, and I asked my dad, by then he had started to talk to me, and I asked him, you know, can I come and visit? He said, sure, let me know, I'll make sure I'm not here, right? Part of the reason why was because I was welcome, but my husband wasn't. And under those conditions, I wasn't going to go back home. Because if you didn't accept my choices, you didn't accept me. So we had quite a bit of I was my dad's daughter, let's just say that, right? We were both very, very stubborn.
So the last question on that moment, but what did it do to your will, your fire, even in the midst of that heartbreak, to make you stronger? I'm sure you found strength out of that place, even though it really was a heartbroken space.
I was determined to become the most responsible person I could. Because growing up, not only was I daddy's girl, as much money as you could give me, I'd spend. And then more, right? So I was flighty, I was irresponsible, or that's what the perception was. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, but I wasn't responsible enough. So I was determined to prove to myself more than anyone else that I was a responsible person and that I was going to do the things that I needed to do to be successful and prove not just to him, and this is another thing that I've realized, and I don't know about whether this resonates with you, but I often worry about that critical parent in my head, you know, or the critical voice in my head that's always talking about the fact that I'm not doing all that needs to be done. So that was a huge drive, at least for me. And I think that was the cost or the price that I paid too.
Okay. One more question, I'm gonna move on to current times. But how did you know you wanted to teach? And who wakes up and says, I want to do research? So like, what was planted in your head and say, wow, I really want to focus on this area?
So I still remember going back to when I was 10 years old, actually. You know, we lived in a very isolated area. So outside of school, I didn't really have lots of friends that I could play with because we didn't have neighbors where my parents lived. So I pretended to be this teacher to imaginary kids, and I was going to teach them math. Right? And of course, the nuns in my convent that I went to had canes at that time, right? Or rulers. So it would be like, you, tell me what the answer is to this, right? I mean, that was the way that I learned. And I just loved having to explain things and have things be explained to me. My teachers, my science teacher, I remember, once said to me, Rajshree, why do you have to ask so many whys? So I guess I was always a good student. That was one of my identities.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because the why, you'll never, if it's the true why, it's something that I would have never expected to come out of your mouth. I didn't even know that you were going to say that you were in the backyard teaching imaginary kids, but you know, but because of your love. All right, so.
And then research.
And your love for research. Oh,
yes.
What about research? You
yes.
didn't talk about research.
So I do get up with a spring in my step every morning, particularly when I'm working on a research paper. Because for me, research is about creating new knowledge. If teaching is about disseminating knowledge to current leaders, current citizens, current people that are going to go out in business and foster their own enterprise, then research is really about how can we create the new knowledge that is going to be very, very relevant in the times for tomorrow. So for me, these two go hand in hand. I think that in an educational enterprise, all of us, staff, students, faculty, we all have a very serious obligation, and that is to foster minds, to create sparks in young minds, and to continue that as lifelong learning. So I see both of them as being very complementary, in addition to our responsibility to truly engage in society, in business, in policy, however you want to do it. So I see our job in academia as all three of them have to be completely intertwined. Teaching, research, and engagement.
I recall when Rajshree, when I was at Illinois, she was bestowed chair at the University of Illinois. Before I continue with that, what is a chair? How do you earn the notion of an endowed chair? What does that mean?
So in an academic track, you start off tenure track as an assistant professor. You publish and you teach and you do service. I remember my first dean saying to me, Rajshree, in order to succeed in academia, you have to excel in at least two categories: research, teaching, and service doesn't count. Right. So the first 6 years you have to make it, and I, by the way, disagreed with him on that. I do think service counts. I think service matters because you have to be part of an institution. Indeed, and I'll tell you the story of what Larry said to me when I was moving from Illinois to Maryland. Don't let me forget that. But as it relates to being from assistant to associate professor with tenure, you have to have enough of a research record and have to be enough of an effective teacher. So teaching won't get you tenure, but it will prevent you from getting tenure, is the way that we understand it. And then from associate, you can stay associate and tenured for the rest of your life and retire. But then if you have enough of an impact and publications, then you're going to make it to full professor. And many of us get to full professor status, but don't necessarily make it beyond that. So if you want to stay in academia, the endowed professorship is a chair that is bestowed on you for additional impact that you've had through your scholarship, through your teaching, and through your engagement.
You would agree that it is hard to become an endowed chair?
Yes, very few people.
Very few people.
In academia.
I remember there were times at Illinois and even at Maryland, just think about the atmosphere. There's so many questions, so little time, because I want to give you guys time to answer questions. In an ego-driven environment where I'm sure at the end of the day, behind the closed doors, there are all kinds of political conversations being had when they're discussing you, when you're not in the room, on whether or not they're going to grant you such a prestigious thing. There were times when, even when I would sit in on faculty meetings at Illinois, and I'm telling you, there were so many egos in the room. I would sit back and just shake my head saying, I just can't imagine being a professor. And then there would be Rajshree. I mean, just think about some of the heated exchanges or even just some of the nasty things that would be said out of someone's mouth. And I have never seen, she said she got mad one time. I've never seen her angry. I have seen her get up in the middle of this angst and just change the whole atmosphere in her quality, in her being, probably in her teaching. She had a way of sort of like, I tease her now, just say, you have a way of making us feel like, okay, and so it shall be done. But, like, how did you get me thinking that way? But we joke about that all the time. But I just do spend some time talking about from the standpoint of being a woman in an environment that's already competitive, ego-driven, and just kind of sometimes downright mean. How do you get to this place from the standpoint of an environment that's really not as, sensitive in that way?
So at University of Central Florida, I received excellence in research every year in my first 6 years. I won all of the awards that I could at the university level and at the school level. So there was a Teaching Incentive Performance Award that was given for excellence in teaching. There was a Research Incentive Performance Award that was given in research. I got all of those. I got an award from the state of Florida. I'm saying this to you not because I'm one of those egotistical people that Victor's talking about, but because when it came time for me to get tenure, the department gave me a negative vote. Why? And there was no basis for it. In fact, it was overturned by the school, and the provost, when he met me at University of Central Florida, when he finally said, "You've got tenure," he said the rebuttal letter that I had written based on my department's negative vote was the best that he had seen, because it was factual. And it was based on, there is this book that I want to read. I've read the author's second book, which is Deep Work, by Cal Newport. But his first book is so good, you can't ignore me. And I want to read that book because I already like what he's saying in his second book, and I think I know what he's going to say in the first book. So first and foremost, I needed to be so good that anyone couldn't ignore me. And that was my ticket in. I always felt like I was on the outside looking in. And how do I get in? So how do I get in? I needed to be really, really good at what I was doing. But funnily enough, I never made gender or the color of my skin an issue. Even at that time, when I had these guys that ultimately voted me down, because they were threatened and fearful, actually, of what I represented. It wasn't me, it was this new wave in University of Central Florida moving from teaching into research focused, and I was the first of the hires. So we had a contingency of these white men come together and vote me down and kind of throw almost stones at a very stellar record otherwise.
This is Central Florida.
This is at Central Florida. So during that time, though, even when people, I guess there was this sense of obliviousness that I did feel, and I'm glad that I felt it, that it wasn't the gender or the color of my skin that was causing others to treat me or dismiss me or try to minimize me. And my attitude then was very healthy. It's like, if you're not going to listen to what I have said because you're going to dismiss me because I'm a woman or because I am a brown-skinned person, too bad on you. I'm so good that I'm going to go ahead and do this. And you're the one that has underestimated me, so you're going to lose. I don't think I realized that I had that attitude, but I'm grateful and thankful that I did, because that got me through. Of course I was angry, by the way, that they refused me tenure given the record that I had. But in that tenure rebuttal letter, I made sure I did everything I needed to vent. By the way, this is why you need to have a very strong circle of friends, people whom you can trust to be yourself, to let yourself get angry, cry, do whatever it is you need to do to process your emotions. Because when you bring yourself to work, as I had to do in that rebuttal letter, I had to be as factual, as logical as possible, so that I didn't come across as this emotional person who was angry or upset. And I was going to make sure that they were going to take me seriously on merit and not based on my emotional reaction.
So there are times when your early seasons, I reflect on my own time when I didn't really have, in my mind, power. And I know you're going to have a thought on power, but don't get to that thought yet. I'm just talking about, what would you say to the young staff and faculty who are, in their view, you know, are they able to say, I'm so good, you gonna do what I, you know, do they have that ability? I'm gonna probably say no, not really. And so then what do you say to them in their space right now where they're feeling like they're powerless?
So I didn't think I said at that time that I'm so good, right? And I think actually people that come across as arrogant and conceited, honestly, they're not comfortable in their own skins. So that's why they need to, in some sense, lord over you, to make you feel like there's something big. So I don't think my modus operandi was, oh, Victor, I am so good and you're going to take it. I was really about doing good work. And even as an assistant professor, or for that matter as a graduate student, when I taught my first class, my attitude was, I'm going to do teaching this class the best that I can. And going back to my disagreement with my first dean about why service doesn't count and why I disagreed on that, you want to be part of the institution that you're in. And part of being the institution that you're in, regardless of whether you start as a graduate student or as an assistant professor or as an incoming staff person, there are always going to be problems. And this is something Carly Fiorina talked about last week, I thought really resonated well with me, right? There are always going to be problems that need to be solved. And so it's not about, oh, I'm so good, you can't ignore me. It is creating value. So as I said before, for me, what success looks like for any one of us is being able to say, I love what I do and I'm good at it. The flip side of it is, what's your value proposition? What are your unique abilities that are providing value to the other person? And so I don't think in terms of power as in I get to tell you what you need to do, or a position of being powerless as in somebody else is telling me what I need to do and I have no permission and no agency in this approach. I think really of power as in, what problems am I solving for you that are important to you, such that I become indispensable to you, right? In fact, I will say this about Christina. Christina is my managing director. She's indispensable to me. She provides me a value proposition as my complement. And by the way, that doesn't mean that she and I don't argue, right? She and I will give you lots and lots of stories about how we do that. So that's not the point, right? And one could say, oh, I have the power over Christina because she reports to me. I don't think of things as in this position of power, as in I get to tell you what to do. I don't even try to do that with my own daughters, though there are a couple of times when I will put my foot down and say, you will do this. But I think that that's where true power comes in, that you want to make yourself indispensable.
I believe you, and I promise you I do. Rajshree is among my circle of friends, and when I hear her say that, and particularly know too, because Rajshree doesn't like being associated with power or competitive. But we have sat in the backyard, and she's going to win that volleyball game. She will elbow you until But why do you not want to be associated with the notion of having power and being competitive?
You know, this may be, I think there might be some gender norms associated with it. I do think that if you ask men, if they're comfortable with being thought of as aggressive or competitive or powerful, they look at it as a positive, right? I was taught right from the beginning to look at that as a negative, right? So I do like winning, but when I think the word competitive, it is exactly what you said, right? I don't think I've ever elbowed you, Victor, so let's be real about that, okay? I do like to win, and I'm not very good at volleyball, by the way, right? But it is not by cutting corners. It's not by exerting force. So I, rightly or wrongly, that's what I associate with. As competitive as in I'm winning at your expense. So I like to think, and I think this suits us very well as a style, I like to win through collaboration. So when you're, in my mind, right or wrong, competition is the opposite of collaboration. Winning is not the opposite of collaboration, but competition is. And that may be something that I have to get over, think that they're not opposites of each other, right? Or to the extent that they are, I prefer collaboration to competition.
Okay. I have one more question. I'm going to open it up for you guys to ask questions, so get them ready. And we, of course, know each other's kids. And I remember having a conversation. I actually was in South Africa, Jeanette, when I had a conversation with her daughter. We were talking over the phone. And I remember telling Alicia that, because she was in a moment, because she's extremely smart, very bright, But at that time, she felt
She
like
takes after her mother.
she felt like she was actually being she wasn't in a good space, that she was afraid to sort of spat on how smart she was. And I remember telling her that there are going to be times, even beyond your graduation, that you're going to be envied, men and women, by the way, and you're going to be seen as that person, and a lot of it has to do with people might be intimidated by, you know, your ability to articulate your voice as strong as it is, and that you're going to have to find your space to be Alicia, be authentic Alicia. I just wanted to have you kind of react to that, because we talked about it in terms of even the staff. Each of you are going through your own individual journeys. Each of you have been at places for a while, and I'm just not even talking about Smith. It's talking where's your space. I do it every other day. I have a circle of friends here, and I have a circle of friends somewhere else. But we always talk about the notion of what does this truly mean in terms of value, and what does it mean when people sort of, I think similar to you, I do not look at, I know it exists. I know people are looking at the color of my skin in terms of where I am, but I don't let it, you know, keep me moving. Now, the only way that I actually will say something is if you put a wall in front of me and I can't move. But the other thoughts, you're going to have to sort of work around the environment. What would you say, just based on what I told Alicia in terms of authentic, how can people be authentic in a place like this and feel happy when they walk in the morning, when the environment oftentimes don't let them be authentic?
Right. So in particular, what I really appreciated you telling Alicia, and thank you for doing that, is to realize that there are some things that are her dog, things that she needs to work on for herself to grow. But it's also important to understand when it's not her problem, but somebody else's problem. So the first and foremost issue that I often say is, what problem am I trying to solve? So when you're coming into a conflict situation, and by the way, working with people, in fact, the best people, you are going to engage in conflict. Because if there are two minds that are thinking, sooner or later you're going to disagree on something. So it's not about the fact that you disagree. It is, what are the fundamental causes of the disagreement? And then what do you do about that disagreement in order to resolve it constructively? Mm-hmm. So to the extent that you always need to reflect and recognize what is your problem that you do need to fix in order for something to go successful and for both of you to have a win-win relationship. And whether it's one-on-one or whether it's one-on-many, it's the same issue, right? If I am disagreeing with you or you're disagreeing with me, or there are some conflicts that are going on out here, we need to identify, first of all, how important is this conflict to be resolved. Not every conflict should be resolved and requires all of your energy. Sometimes the best thing to do is to walk away from a toxic relationship. And I have walked away from many co-authorships and many partnerships that were creating a lot of value because the emotional cost was just not worth it for me. I need to protect and preserve my emotional energy. For doing that, I need to bend over backwards to make sure that I'm bringing my best self to the table. But you know what I used not to do before is hold the other person to the same high standard. I would give them a pass. So if it was the case in any kind of a conflict, if I assessed that 90% of it was you and 10% was me, somehow or the other in my mind, I only focused on that 10% and you were given a pass on that 90%. What I'm starting to do now is to hold people to the same standard that I'm holding myself. So especially when you're coming across feelings of envy and jealousy, you have to first of all recognize that these are, you don't even know that these are envy and jealousy, right? People aren't going to come back to you and say, I'm envious of you, or I'm jealous, right? What they're going to do is react to you in a manner that you know is not constructive, right? It's draining on them and it's draining on you. So first and foremost, you also need to identify what problem am I solving here? And then attribute it as authentically and as honestly as you can. Have a good conversation. Open up with I statements, right? But then when you realize that it's not your problem, it's their problem, you have to then figure out what it is that you're going to do so that you don't get drained and dragged down because of somebody else's emotional problems. By the way, envy is an emotion that I feel if you have something that I want. Jealousy is a feeling or emotion that I feel if I have something that I don't want to lose to you. Right? As in jealous lover, that's when we do it, right? So envy and jealousy is really a social comparison based on who has what is desirable. But envy and jealousy are negative emotions, and often they create negative strategies, right? So envy often calls for barriers for the person that has something, or redistribution. It's not fair that you have it and I don't. Jealousy also calls for barriers, or in our current economy, it calls for cronyism, right? So I get to keep my riches by using government force as an example, right? But that need not be the case when you're comparing yourself to someone. If you find that someone has something that you desire, you can be inspired and you can feel hope. And you can go back to that person and say, hey, you're very successful here. You've got what I aspire to be. What were the strategies that helped you become successful, right? So you can choose not to feel envious and feel hope and inspiration instead. Or if you're feeling jealousy, you feel threatened, you may lose something that you want to keep, right? You may then say, what do I need to do to preserve this? What do I need to do to keep deserving it? And then I can feel gratitude and pride. And I can go ahead and engage in productive effort to attain. So we don't, do I feel envious? Yes. But then I have to remind myself that that is an emotion that has a dual that I would rather feel. And then that is how I reframe the conversation in my head time and time again.
Okay. All right. What kind of questions and thoughts or statements or positions that you have?
The first question's usually always.
Yes, because I was about to tell you guys that, we're right here. We'll get you, Kristen.
So first, just want to thank you for speaking with us today. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So it sounds like you made some really brave choices early on as a 12-year-old and forward. What lessons would you hope to impart to your daughter?
So just for the sake of the camera, I have to repeat the question if y'all sitting here wondering why is he doing this. And so the question is, what lessons do you or would you or are you? Okay, you fill in the blank. Departing to your daughters.
So I do talk to my both daughters quite a bit. I think the biggest lesson I would say to them in retrospect is be gentle on yourself. I think I was very hard on myself and very unforgiving of myself. It has served me well, so don't get me wrong. I often wonder if I hadn't been as hard and demanding of myself, might have I been as successful as I am. And I think I would have, in the following sense. It was in a self program that words of wisdom out of a kid's mouth.
Self is one of our summer programs for high school students. Just
Thank you. So in our self program, I was talking about this need to be gentle to yourself. And I said, you can strive for excellence only in a nurturing environment. This is something that I had just realized, so I was sharing it with them. And so I said, why am I saying this? So this one bright kid raised his hand, nailed it. He said, because when you're striving for excellence, you're reaching up. Why would you want to bring yourself down by beating yourself up? Right? So well said. So I think that would be the balance that I would say to my daughters and to myself from 20 or 30 years ago.
Yes, Kristen.
Thank you, Rajshree.
Thank you, Kristen.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier was this critical voice that a lot of us struggle with and grapple with on a day-to-day basis. And as you know, I'm in a PhD program too, and I literally just had this conversation yesterday with one of my classmates about this critical voice and how it keeps growing stronger, especially in academia, because we're always forced to ask questions. And so with that critical voice, how do
So the question is,
Thank you, Rajshree.
how do you manage the critical voice in your head so that it's constructive and not destructive?
Well, that's a good question.
I think it relates back to my answer to the earlier question. It really goes and to the answer that I had regarding force yourself to be as objective as you can and not let your emotions drive you. So, by the way, in academia, there is one place where true humility really, really pays off. I actually do not envy any of the faculty that I meet, my peers, who feel like they know everything. Because, you know, I actually don't think that that's the position you want to be in anyway. There is this beautiful quote by Eric Hoffer that says, in times of change, the learners will inherit the world, while the learned will find themselves living beautifully equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. And I have always lived by that. Part of the reason why I proudly say that I've been in school all my life, and if I can help it, I will be in school the rest of my life, is because I recognize that that striving, that learning, that curiosity is a drive that actually not only yields success to me, but is also what keeps me young. But the way to do that then is to know what you don't know and be comfortable with it, rather than second guess yourself and beat yourself up for not being learned enough. So as a PhD student, or as in any moment of your life, embrace what you know, own that. And isn't it great that I have so much more to learn? So with my PhD students, I was giving a talk at one of these mentorship conferences, CCC, that I'm the president on. And one of the things that I was talking about was everything that I had learned from my students who had done their PhDs with me. And one of my current students was in the room, and I wasn't even thinking about it from his perspective. And he came, when I finished, he came to me and he says, Rajshree, you just threw me a great big challenge. And I said, I challenged you? How did I do that? I was talking about my journey, right? He said, you challenged me to now think, what is it that I am going to teach Rajshree that she doesn't already know? Right? Embrace that aspect, regardless of whether you are in a subordinate versus a senior position. If you're a senior position, or a supervisor, embrace the fact that you can learn a lot from your subordinates. If you're a subordinate, embrace the fact that you can teach your superior a lot that they don't necessarily know.
Ooh, I just got to just do a commercial break. That Jeanette and Kristen are doing their PhD. I know y'all both heard that really well, didn't you? All right. Yes.
Hi, I'm an undergraduate student.
Oh. Welcome.
Thank you. And a lot of times, like when I'm talking to friends, and we always like stumble upon like this one idea, and we think that we should do something about this. There's like there's a good opportunity for this. Something that always like prevents me from actually doing something about it is a possible conflict within me and my friends in the future. As I'm always scared that would like make our friendship like bitter. How do you prevent that from like being?
So the question is, how do I stop fear from stopping me, particularly when the fear is about losing valued relationships? Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Another author that I'm really enjoying these days is James Clear, C-L-E-A-R. If you're on Facebook, he has these posts. You can also subscribe to his weekly newsletter. He talks very nicely about how uncertainty, feeling stupid, feeling fearful, does not make you less of a person, but it's an indication to you that you're about to embark on something that's courageous. So you are right to feel fearful that a relationship that you deeply care about doesn't go south. But you are wrong to let that fear stop you. Fear is a very important indication to us. You know, the reason why we feel all of the 5 or 6 emotions that psychologists talk about is because they're important for our survival. Fear is an indication that something is threatening us or threatening something that's valuable to us. But rather than acting on it as in stopping yourself, what I would suggest you do is ask yourself, what are the reasons why you're fearful on doing that? What about that relationship makes you concerned that you would lose it? And like I said to you before, hold yourself to a high standard of committing to that relationship and hold the other person to that same high standard of committing to that relationship. And you know, the other way to look at it is I have stopped thinking about relationships being lifelong. By the way, we talked about the fact that I went from University of Central Florida to University of Illinois to now University of Maryland. I've moved 3 times. One of the other reasons I've been very successful is in all of those moves, I guarded my mobility options really, really well, right? So because I knew that if I didn't like the position or the climate that I was in, I was able to move to another position or a climate that was going to be better fit for myself. Right? So that was something that that's something that you should always be thinking about. So I've always said, I make a commitment to an institution 5 years at a time. Why 5 years? That's the year I chose, right? It could be 3, it could be 5. I choose 5 years because it's long enough for me to commit an institution build and see the rewards of it, you know, but not short enough that I can't do any of those. So on this point about embarking on something that's new, don't make it as a lifelong one. Make it enough distance apart that if it's important, you need to work at it. And then you need to see the rewards, right? But if you force yourself to saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose it, and it's a lifelong thing, then you're stymieing yourself. So funnily enough, being able to commit to an institution 5 years at a time has caused me to stay at all of these institutions for at least twice the amount that I would have otherwise. But that's the renewed commitment that I have to the institution and the institution needs to make to me.
Well, I love the term guard my mobility, but go ahead.
Hi, Rajshree. Thank you.
Hi, Beatrice.
Hi, Victor.
How are you?
Good. My question is, you talk about protecting your emotions and your feelings in the workplace, and I will be curious to hear, how do you balance protecting and guarding your emotions and being vulnerable in the workspace now that vulnerability has been used as I would say, as a tool in some cases by some leaders to show vulnerability? So how do you balance those?
Okay, so I do enjoy Brené Brown's The Power of Vulnerability and all of her books, and I greatly recommend that we use that. I don't see protecting my emotions as the opposite of vulnerability. In fact, I see it as very consistent with it. When I'm saying I'm protecting my emotions, what I meant more there is I'm protecting my emotional energy. I am trying to preserve the positivity that I feel. That doesn't mean that I don't get angry. And yes, I did lose my temper. Some of you may have been there.
Well, I want you to talk about that later.
But I think losing temper is equivalent to being weak. Funnily enough, I don't see vulnerability and sharing my fears as being weak. But I do see losing my temper as being weak. That means that I lost control of myself in a manner that I needed to throw a temper tantrum. Right? And that's not effective. Talking to people about my fears is actually opening myself up to them and making them realize that I'm a human too. And I'm feeling these feelings. By the way, I bring my entire heart, body, and soul to work every day. I feel as passionately as I could about everything, right? I feel anger, I feel hatred, I feel love, I feel sadness, I feel all of those emotions, right? But in my interactions, particularly in a professional setting, I also need to worry about whether or not I'm being effective. And I have realized this, strategically, I have been the best when I have gotten angry. I have contained my anger. I have gone back and thought about why I was angry. What were the reasons that caused me to be this upset? And then think about how to meet the other person in a manner that gets me what I want, but also addresses the issue. And by the way, I have done that with Alex, who's my superior, my boss, right? There was a time when he did something, or he wanted to stop me from doing something that was very important to me. I care deeply about upward mobility, and the upward mobility of my staff and the people that work with me is paramount to me. So if there are going to be people that are going to stop me from doing what is right by my staff, by the way, abuse of power gets me like nothing else, right? So that moment that I lost my temper in the faculty meeting, it was because this one faculty member was constantly, I thought, abusing everybody else's goodwill and throwing temper tantrums and continuing on for months after months after months. And nobody was willing to step up and stop this from happening. So that was one time when I finally just lost it, and I said, how long are we collectively going to continue on this issue that is failing to give our professional faculty the respect that they deserve? That's what I lost my temper on. And I'm not actually upset with myself for losing it, because that was very calculated and very deliberate, because I had thought about what was the best way to deal with this for the longest time. I had tried all of the other ways, but sometimes bullies need to be just taken head on. And I was willing to take on the bully then.
All right then. Okay. Yes.
Go with a related question. So not in this particular instance, when you felt really passionate about something and you do believe in controlling your temper, but let's say you lost your temper.
How do I recover?
You tried everything else, not in this particular instance where it was probably justified, but in another situation where you did, and then maybe may have regretted losing your temper. How would you then repair it or do something to fix it?
So I have another story. So 2 times in this building that I've lost my temper. One
2?
that was
Jeez.
public, yes. The second time was actually because we were in a faculty seminar, and this person who was from OBHR, endowed professor himself, but he didn't know who I was, I didn't know who he was, right? So maybe there was a power dynamics that was unconsciously occurring, I don't know. But I found we had just had a PhD presentation where I had called on some of the PhD student who was presenting to talk about what not to do in a presentation in a seminar. And this person was doing all of that. He was being dismissive. He was being superficial in his answers. He was not recognizing a literature and giving enough respect to that literature. So as a scholar, I was getting more and more upset about the entire demeanor with which he was approaching this. And I thought that was a waste of time. Now, the big problem was I didn't have my computer with me. So I couldn't check out, right? I wish I had the ability to check out during that conversation. And then at one point in time, I said, you know what? I'm not going to engage anymore. So I stopped asking questions. But then there is this other PhD student 10 minutes later that asked the same issue question that what I was asking. So that got me started again, right? I'm again emotionally and intellectually engaged in something that I deeply care about. And so, he asked this question and he dismissed him again. And it was clear that we were now heading, the speaker and I, were heading into a conversation. Were you there, Pratiti, for this?
I think so.
You were there, right? I mean, this is something that really created quite a stir because, he did something and then I finally had it. I just walked up and I left. Right? And it was so visible that I left, because I was I was really, really upset. So he's like, wow, that's never happened to me. Most of my colleagues would agree with the fact that I had reason to be upset. However, I had embarrassed them. What I had done was not appropriate as a host faculty member to a guest who had come to our institution. I had not kept control of my own emotions. That's why I'm saying I was weak. So the next day, I'm very comfortable with the fact that I had reason to not like what this person had said, and completely still believe that what I felt and thought was right. But I could have handled it better. So the next day, I sent an apology to all of the faculty and all of the PhD students in the department, saying, I'm sorry I let you down, because I lost my temper, and in doing so, I did not follow the norms and customs of what a host faculty should do. For that, I sincerely apologize. I did not apologize to him. I don't think he deserved my apology. But my fellow colleagues certainly deserved my apology. So that's what I did to repair a relationship.
Well, we are almost done. Thank you so much, Rajshree. Do you guys have any final thoughts before I ask you just to give just a final statement? All right. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes.
So, Rajshree, I'm struck by the fact that just looking around the room, I see Pratiji, and are there any other faculty members that I'm not seeing? So
And
there
Christina.
are a couple of faculty members, but primarily we see at the Smith School and really in higher education, especially in the business field, that most of the faculty are male. And yet I also look around the room, and most of the staff in higher education in general and at the Smith School are female. And there is a faculty staff divide, much in the way that you talked about clinical faculty, professional faculty, and tenure track faculty. How do we as women who are in administration come to the table with the same voice? Not talking about power, but the same kind of voice, the same kind of demand for respect that faculty, and especially male faculty, have at the school and in higher education in general?
Good question.
What are your thoughts?
Thank you for that.
So, Rebecca, your question is, particularly in academia, where most faculty are male and most administrative staff are women, how do you negotiate this power imbalance or balance? And what do you do to bring your voice to the table so that you're doing things that are right, first and foremost, and then second, appreciated and recognized? My husband was a staff member, worked with Victor, both at University of Illinois and here at University of Maryland before he retired early. You know, one thing that he said to me that I've always appreciated, and so this is why I don't believe that it's completely about gender, but I do want to come back to the gender issue. He said, in academia, I as a staff member have to recognize the reality that I live in. That faculty are, we don't even believe that Alex is our boss. Or Wallace Lowe is our boss.
Did y'all hear that? I just want to set the stage.
Right.
Okay,
We
go
don't
ahead.
even believe that's the case, right? We hold academic freedom, and one of the reasons why we as faculty, by the way, take the job that we do is because we value autonomy as highly as we do, right? So hierarchy doesn't make sense for it doesn't compute in a typical faculty member's mind. One of the articles that I read was, the hardest job in the world is not that of CEO. It is the president of a university. Because your job as the president of the university is to only use persuasion. Because once you got tenure, I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to listen to you, right? And there's very little that you can do to fire me. So the hardest job of a president is to persuade, and you do carrots. Sticks don't work. And that is very different from industry. It's just the reality that we live in. One of the things that I always appreciated about Rob is he was very comfortable in that. He was comfortable in knowing that in this hierarchy, they were going to do whatever it is that they wanted to do, and he was in another tier. But he was also comfortable in his skin about talking to them in a manner that didn't mean that he was intimidated by this relationship. And I thought that he navigated that beautifully well. So, coming back to your answer out here is, are there jerks? Yes. No question about it. But you have agency in whom you can choose to deal with and whom you choose not to deal with, right? And how you minimize your interactions with jerks. So that's the first thing I would say, male or female, avoid jerks as much as you can.
That's a great life lesson.
It is, right? Because that's what I'm saying. You don't have to fix every relationship.
This is a life lesson.
You don't have to fix every relationship. Some relationships you're better off just letting go, right? The second thing, however, is going back to what problems can I solve for you that are important for you? That becomes the basis of my interactions with you. And if I'm coming to you with a solution, you better believe that they're going to hear you. Now, there are multiple things that I can go ahead, and by the way, I am very sympathetic, by the way, of being in a staff position and then having to deal with faculty. And I'm one of those faculty that can be a bear to deal with. I'm going to be very honest about that, right? I mean, I always say to the people that work for me, with me, and my PhD students, go talk to the other people. Figure out what are my faults, and then figure out how to work around them.
That's life.
Right? So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but
hard.
those would be the ways that at least I would approach it.
Hard to do. Okay, leave us with some words of wisdom so we can go on about our business.
My gosh, I've had so much fun interacting with all of you, and I really appreciated all of the questions. Look, one thing that I would say to you is don't worry so much. I'll go back to guard your mobility options. Think about what problems of the world you want to solve. Focus on what's important to you. Often we think we want to make the world a better place to live. Oh my gosh, how can I, one person, make the world a better place to live? Or isn't that very presumptuous of me to say that? But if we believe that our world are the places we go, the things that we do, and the people that we meet every day, that's our world. If we've made it better, the world's better. And the one constant in your world is you. So if you're not happy, the people around you are not going to be happy either, right? So preserve whatever it is that you need to do. So in that sense, be very selfish. Not selfish as in riding roughshod over other people. Because if you are protecting what matters to you, define what is important to you.
It's non-negotiable.
And then go after that. And it's non-negotiable. That those things you don't compromise on. But given that you know who you are and what's important to you, find the other people who have their own abilities, their own aspirations. Figure out what is the common objective that can bring you with them together. And then decide on what are the actions that will create win-win relationships. That way, you're providing a value to the other person, you're doing something that you love, and you're making the world a better place. It's the world that you live in. Thank you for listening to me.